A quiet suburban morning turns into a moment of pure terror when a furious husband hurls a wooden chair at his pregnant wife. She manages to lean aside just in time, but the window behind her explodes like a small bomb. What he does not know is that across the street, a neighbor has seen everything. The camera is already rolling, and that single clip will ignite a fire he will never be able to put out. Because the woman he tried to break is no longer standing alone. The neighbor steps out from his porch, ready to protect her, and drag the truth into the light. What follows is a battle between violence, courage, and a kind of justice powerful enough to shake an entire neighborhood. And trust me, you will not believe where this story goes until we take that journey together. Let us know what time you are listening and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. The early autumn morning in the suburbs of Denver carried a crisp and chilly stillness that made the quiet neighborhood feel almost suspended in time. Pale sunlight filtered through the thin veil of clouds, brushing the houses with a cold, silver glow. Inside one of those homes, Lily Hart stood in the living room with one hand at the small of her back and the other resting protectively over her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant and already exhausted from weeks of tension, she tried to steady her breathing as a sense of unease pulled tight in her chest. Her body recognized danger even before her mind did. She whispered a soft plea for calm, hoping the silence would settle the storm she sensed rising behind her. Victor Hart, her husband of 4 years, stood only a few steps away. At 38, he carried the look of a man who once believed he controlled everything around him. Today, that illusion had shattered. His latest financial gamble had failed overnight and wiped out a large portion of their savings. The pressure, mixed with his growing resentment, had turned him into a live wire ready to erupt at the smallest spark. His face was flushed with anger, and the veins along his neck stood out like cords pulled to their limit. In his hands he gripped a heavy wooden dining chair, lifting it slightly as if testing its weight. His eyes were wild and unfocused, fixed on Lily with a fury that made her pulse race. Lily swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she said his name. She told him to breathe and to put the chair down. Her attempt at reasoning only fueled the fire burning inside him. Victor yelled back that she had ruined his life. He blamed her for every failure, every worry, every fear that clawed at his pride. His shout cracked through the room like a violent strike. Lily flinched and instinctively shielded her belly. She begged him again to calm down, but her voice grew smaller with each second. She felt her legs shaking. The echo of the neighbor's wind chimes rattled faintly outside the broken morning air, a gentle contrast to the fury growing in the house. Victor shifted his stance, the chair raised higher. He seemed to lose the thin thread of self-control he had left. His hand tightened around the backrest, and without a moment of hesitation, he hurled the chair across the room toward Lily. The distance between them was barely 10 feet. Lily let out a sharp gasp and threw herself to the side. She felt the rush of air as the chair flew past her shoulder. A split second later, it slammed into the large front window behind her. The explosion of breaking glass filled the room with a horrifying crash. The sound was so violent it seemed to shake the walls. Shards scattered across the hardwood floor, glittering like ice in the morning light. Some pieces landed only inches from Lily's feet. The shock dropped Lily to her knees. Her hands clutched her belly as she fought to breathe. For a moment, she feared the worst. She felt a tight pinch in her abdomen, then a wave of dizziness. Tears stung her eyes as she tried to focus on staying conscious and keeping her baby safe. Her vision blurred as she crawled backward, desperate to put distance between herself and Victor's rage. Across the street, Harold Bennett, a 72-year-old Vietnam veteran, sat at his kitchen table sipping his morning coffee. The sudden crash snapped him out of his quiet routine. He looked through his window and noticed the shattered glass glinting from the Hart house. When he leaned forward for a clearer view, he saw Lily collapsing near the broken window. A deep frown creased his weathered face. He had lived long enough to recognize the signs of danger and fear. Harold reached for his old smartphone resting on the counter. His hands, though aged, moved with purpose. He turned on the camera and began recording through his window. His breath tightened as he zoomed in. Inside the house, Victor was still shouting, pacing like a man lost inside his own rage. He looked unaware of the destruction around him and completely unaware that someone outside was watching. Lily tried to crawl toward the hallway, her movements slow and trembling. Every shift of her weight sent another wave of panic rising in her. She felt trapped between fear for her baby and the instinct to protect herself. She could barely hear Victor's words anymore. Instead, she heard the pounding of her heartbeat and the ringing left behind from the glass explosion. Harold shook his head with a grim determination. He whispered to himself that this needed to stop before someone got killed. With the phone still recording, he reached for the landline mounted on the wall. His voice was steady but urgent as he told the 911 operator that a domestic violence incident was happening right across the street. He described the sound of the breaking window and the sight of the pregnant woman on the floor. He stressed that she needed help immediately. While Harold spoke, the morning breeze moved through the trees, scattering yellow leaves that drifted across the quiet street. The contrast between the peaceful neighborhood and the chaos inside the Hart home felt chilling. Harold kept his eyes locked on the house as he waited for the sound of sirens. He knew that every second mattered. Inside, Lily pressed her palm to her belly and forced herself to breathe through the tightness in her chest. She whispered to her baby, telling the child to stay strong. A faint trembling ran through her arms as she pushed herself a little farther down the hallway. The smell of dust and splintered wood mixed with the metallic scent of broken glass. Then, faint at first but unmistakable, the distant wail of approaching sirens drifted through the autumn air. The sound grew louder, echoing down the street and bouncing off the houses. It carried with it the weight of urgency and the promise of intervention. Lily closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her like a fragile lifeline. Harold ended the call and continued recording, making sure every detail was captured. He whispered a soft prayer for Lily and her unborn child. The sirens drew closer, rising in pitch, until they filled the entire neighborhood. Their urgent cry announced that help was finally arriving, and as the lights approached, the shattered morning stood frozen, waiting for what would come next. The inside of the ambulance rattled with movement as paramedics worked quickly around Lily Hart. The bright overhead lights washed her pale face in a harsh glow. She lay on a stretcher with a belt across her lap, her breathing shallow, her hands gripping the sides as if she were holding on to the last bit of stability she had. Every bump in the road seemed to echo through her abdomen. A tightening sensation pulsed across her belly again. It was not sharp, but it was strong enough to make her inhale hard. One of the paramedics noticed her flinch and asked her to describe the pain. Lily whispered that it felt like a tightening wave, not enough to make her cry out, but enough to scare her. She feared what stress could do to a 7-month pregnancy. As the ambulance turned into the parking bay of St. Mary's Hospital, the paramedics prepared her for immediate transfer. Once the back doors swung open, they rolled her into the emergency entrance. Nurses in blue scrubs took over with quick and practiced movements. They pushed the stretcher down a brightly lit hallway that smelled of disinfectant and cold air. Lily kept asking whether her baby was okay. Her voice cracked each time. A nurse walked beside her, holding a handheld fetal monitor, telling her to breathe slowly. The nurse spoke calm words meant to reassure her, but the tension in the woman's eyes betrayed deeper concern. In a separate room, Victor Hart spoke to a pair of police officers. His hair was messy, and his shirt was wrinkled. He paced the floor with exaggerated frustration, as he insisted that the situation at home had been a minor argument. He repeated the same line several times, saying his wife had tripped near the window. He raised his palms as if the officers should obviously believe him. One of the officers noted his agitation and asked him again whether he had thrown anything. Victor denied it, shaking his head and muttering about how emotional pregnancy made women act. His tone was dismissive and impatient. Meanwhile, the medical team brought Lily into an exam room. A doctor applied gel to her abdomen and pressed the ultrasound sensor gently against her skin. The steady thump of the baby's heartbeat filled the room. It sounded strong enough to ease some of her fear. Lily pressed the back of her hand against her lips and closed her eyes as tears ran down her cheeks. She whispered, "A thank you." The doctor told her that stress could trigger mild contractions and that they needed to monitor her closely for a while. Lily nodded, but she struggled to form full sentences. Shock had made her throat feel stiff and narrow. The door to the emergency room area opened, and an elderly man appeared at the threshold. It was Harold Bennett. He walked with careful steps, holding his phone in one hand and gripping the railing along the wall with the other. His face carried a mixture of concern and determination. When he approached the police officers stationed near Lily's room, he introduced himself and explained that he lived across the street. His voice was steady. He said he had something they needed to see. The officers followed him to a quieter corner of the hallway. Harold opened the video on his phone. The recording showed Victor inside the house, yelling, raising the chair, and then hurling it. The officers watched with widening eyes. The sound of the crash echoed from the small phone speaker. It was unmistakable and violent. One officer replayed the moment to confirm what he was seeing. The clarity of the footage erased any doubt. Harold explained that he had heard the crash and had recorded immediately. He looked the officers in the eyes and said, "No woman should face violence like that alone." His voice carried the weight of years and silent memories. While Harold spoke, Lily lay in her room with the curtain half closed. She heard faint voices outside the door and recognized Harold's tone. Though she could not make out the words, she understood that he was helping her. Emotion surged inside her, overwhelming and warm. For the first time since the morning began, she did not feel entirely alone. Tears slipped down her cheeks again, softer this time. She tried to lift herself slightly on her elbows, but the nurse guided her back down gently. The officers returned to Victor with a new seriousness in their posture. They did not reveal everything yet, but they no longer looked inclined to accept his explanation. Victor noticed the shift and grew visibly tense. He asked whether he could see his wife. The officers told him firmly that they were keeping the two separated until statements were completed. Victor rubbed his temples and muttered that this was ridiculous. He sensed something slipping out of his control, but he could not determine what. His eyes darted toward the hallway, as if trying to guess who might have interfered. Inside the exam room, Lily stared up at the ceiling tiles. She whispered to her unborn child, promising to keep them safe. The doctor entered again to check her vitals. Her pulse remained elevated, but her contractions had not intensified. She closed her eyes in relief. She wanted nothing more than peace at that moment, peace for herself and for the tiny heartbeat inside her. Harold stepped to the small window in the hallway and looked into Lily's room. Their eyes met for a brief second. His expression held kindness and a quiet, protective resolve. Lily felt a warmth spread through her chest. She mouthed the words, "Thank you." Harold nodded slowly, as though acknowledging a responsibility he was willing to carry. The lead officer conferred with his partner. They agreed to open a formal investigation based on the video evidence and the condition of the victim. They noted the broken glass, the trauma response, and Victor's inconsistent story. They recorded everything. Victor saw them taking notes and tried to approach, but they signaled for him to stay where he was. His frustration spilled over as he ran his hand through his hair and muttered angrily under his breath. Back inside her room, Lily wiped her eyes and whispered softly. She said she only wanted to be safe. She said she only wanted safety for her baby. The words trembled out of her like a fragile confession. The nurse squeezed her hand in gentle reassurance. The room fell quiet, except for the steady heartbeat on the monitor. It was the only sound Lily needed in that moment. It reminded her that hope was still present, even inside the wreckage of the morning. Victor Hart wasted no time after leaving the hospital. He walked into his office with a stiffness in his shoulders that came from equal parts fear and rage. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and called one of the most aggressive attorneys he knew. Within an hour, a sharply dressed lawyer arrived and began drafting a strategy to reshape the story. Victor insisted that the problem was not violence, but misunderstanding. He spoke quickly, pacing across the room, declaring that public perception needed to be corrected. The lawyer assured him that narratives could be reshaped if handled correctly. The next morning, Victor appeared in front of a local news station. He wore a carefully chosen suit and forced a look of pained concern. He spoke slowly to reporters and claimed that Lily had been under extreme emotional stress throughout her pregnancy. He said she had become unstable and that her memory of the events was unreliable. He emphasized that he loved his wife and that he wanted to support her, but that she needed help. The reporters nodded, as if they were hearing a tragic but familiar story. Within hours, online headlines repeated his claims. Articles described Lily as fragile and unpredictable, and several opinion pieces framed Victor as a devoted husband trying to manage a difficult situation. Back in her hospital bed, Lily scrolled through the news with trembling fingers. Each headline made her stomach tighten. The world she thought might protect her had turned into an echo chamber of lies. She felt humiliation rise in her throat. She could not understand how easily people believed him. She curled her arms around herself, remembering the way Victor used to look at her with disdain, a look that made her feel small. Now the public was beginning to see her through his distorted lens. Later that day, Victor arrived at the hospital. He spoke to Lily in a low voice filled with cold pressure. He told her to retract her statement to the police. He warned her that if she did not cooperate, he would take full custody of the baby once it was born. He said she would lose everything. His words sent a chill through her. She stared at her hands, unable to respond. She felt her body shake with fear. For a moment she wondered whether it was easier to surrender and let the world believe whatever it wanted. Silence felt like the only shield she had left. Across town, Harold Bennett sat in his living room watching the news segment where Victor painted himself as a victim. Harold's jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists on his lap. He had seen men like Victor before. Men who crafted lies faster than the truth could surface. Harold leaned forward and replayed the interview again, studying Victor's gestures. Something inside him stirred, a protective instinct he had not felt in years. He refused to let the truth drown beneath Victor's manipulation. Harold rose from his chair and walked to the small cabinet near his front door. Inside, it was a collection of old hard drives and memory cards from the security cameras installed around his property. He opened his laptop and inserted one of the drives. He reviewed the footage from the night before the incident. The faint glow of streetlights illuminated fragments of audio and shadows. As he listened closely, he heard the muffled sounds of Victor and Lily arguing. Victor's tone grew louder. Lily's voice cracked with fear. The footage did not show the physical events, but the audio alone was enough to reveal the escalating tension. Harold saved the files onto a new drive and organized them by time and date. The small act brought him a sense of purpose. He realized he might have more evidence than he originally believed. He replayed the clips several times, ensuring every second was properly documented. When he finished, he placed the drive carefully into a protective case. He knew exactly what he needed to do next. Early the next morning, Harold called a local organization that supported survivors of domestic abuse. He explained what he had witnessed and offered to assist in any way he could. The staff listened to him with seriousness and told him that they would connect Lily with legal help as soon as possible. Later that afternoon, a woman arrived at the hospital to see Lily. Her name was Sarah Coleman. She was 55, calm, and carried a gentle authority about her. When she entered Lily's room, she sat down and introduced herself as an attorney dedicated to helping women in situations just like hers. At first, Lily hesitated to speak. She felt drained, fragile, and terrified of saying the wrong thing, but Sarah's tone was soft and patient. She assured Lily that everything she said would remain confidential. She asked her to start at the beginning, only if she felt ready. Lily stared out the window for a moment before her composure broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She confessed that Victor had been controlling her for years. She described the fear she felt daily and how she had convinced herself that the problems were her own fault. She admitted that she had believed she was the reason Victor was unhappy. Sarah reached across the table and handed Lily a tissue. She told her gently that none of what happened was her fault. She said that abusers often convince their victims that they are to blame. She told her that she believed her and that she would fight for her. Lily looked at Sarah with a mixture of disbelief and relief. For the first time in a long while, she felt the faintest hint of strength returning to her. Meanwhile, Victor sat alone in his office again. He scrolled through the comments on the news articles. Many people supported him, but a few questioned the story. He sensed a shift brewing on the edges of public opinion. He felt unease creeping under his skin. He wondered why the police had not yet cleared him. He suspected that someone had interfered, When his phone buzzed with a text message about new developments in the investigation, his temper ignited. He hurled the phone across the office and watched it smash against the wall. The sharp crack echoed through the room. His breathing grew heavy. He realized that the situation was slipping from his control, and he knew that someone had begun working against him. For most of his years in the neighborhood, Harold Bennett had been known simply as the quiet, older man who kept his lawn neat and waved politely at passers-by. He rarely spoke about himself. He attended community events without drawing attention, and he helped neighbors shovel snow every winter. Few knew anything about his past. Fewer still knew the depth of experience, loss, and strength that shaped the man he had become. That past began revealing itself only after Lily entered his life in a moment of crisis. Sarah Coleman was the first to sense that Harold was not an ordinary witness. After receiving his video and speaking with him briefly, she asked to meet him again. They arranged a conversation in the small cafeteria of St. Mary's Hospital. Harold arrived in a clean jacket, carrying a folder tucked carefully under his arm. When he sat down, Sarah noticed the precision in his movements and the alertness in his eyes. It was the demeanor of someone who had spent decades trained to observe and analyze. She suspected that his background might be far more complex than he let on. During their conversation, Harold finally shared what he had hidden from the neighborhood for years. He revealed that he had served as an intelligence officer in the United States Air Force. He had spent most of his career working on classified operations involving surveillance, threat assessment, and crisis response. Although he spoke humbly, Sarah could see the depth of experience behind his calm voice. She listened closely as he described a life filled with long deployments, strict discipline, and an unwavering sense of duty. Then he paused. Looking down at the coffee cup in his hands, Harold told her about his late wife, Margaret. She had been killed many years earlier in an incident involving domestic violence. He shared only the outline of the tragedy, but that was enough. The quiet pain in his voice made Sarah lean back in her chair. She felt a sharp ache of sympathy. This was not just a concerned neighbor. This was a man who had lived through a nightmare similar to Lily's. The moment he saw Lily being hurt, the old wound inside him had opened again. It was not anger alone that pushed him to act. It was memory. It was grief. It was a vow he had made to himself long ago that no woman should suffer what his wife suffered if he had the power to stop it. When Sarah left that meeting, she walked with a new understanding. She also walked with a plan. She confirmed Harold's credentials through her own channels and discovered that he indeed had high-level security clearance in the past. She realized that he could be a powerful ally in exposing the truth about Victor. That night she called Harold and suggested they work together. He accepted without hesitation. The next morning, Harold sat in his small home office and reached out to several former colleagues. Though many had retired or moved into new careers, they still respected him. They still answered his calls. He explained that he needed help retrieving publicly accessible financial data on a man named Victor Hart. He also asked if they could check for irregularities or hidden liabilities. His colleagues agreed to look into it. Their combined expertise in research and investigation made them efficient. Within hours, they began sending Harold information. The findings came slowly at first, then rapidly. One colleague located a string of overdue payments tied to Victor's business. Another uncovered a suspicious transfer pattern between Victor's company and a separate account registered under an alias. A third found that Victor had recently taken out a large private loan, one that appeared to be secured using inflated collateral. The pieces of the puzzle hinted at serious financial misconduct. It appeared that Victor was hiding a significant amount of debt while moving company money to cover it. Harold gathered all the reports and created a detailed timeline. He did not embellish anything. He simply organized the truth so that it was clear and irrefutable. Then he contacted Sarah and told her to meet him again. When she arrived, he handed her a thick folder filled with printed documents. She looked through them slowly, her eyes sharpening with each page. She knew instantly that this was no small discovery. Victor was not only violent, he was corrupt. His entire financial world was built on deception. She also realized that the evidence could widen the investigation far beyond domestic violence. It could reach into corporate crime. At Sarah's recommendation, Harold submitted the documents directly to the Financial Crimes Division of law enforcement. The officers he spoke with took the information seriously. When they learned of Harold's background, they gave the reports immediate priority. It did not take long before they agreed that a secondary investigation needed to be launched. The official review process began quietly. They would not approach Victor until all data had been verified. Meanwhile, Lily remained unaware of the specific details until Sarah brought the folder to her hospital room. Lily sat up slowly as Sarah explained that Victor had been hiding financial secrets from her. Lily's eyes widened with disbelief. She had suspected lies, but not fraud. She pressed her hand over her chest as she listened to the summary. She felt overwhelmed, stunned, and shaken. Yet beneath the shock, a new sensation began to grow. It was not fear this time, it was strength. When she looked up at Sarah, something in her expression had changed. Her voice, though quiet, carried a small spark of regained confidence. Harold visited Lily later that afternoon. He walked into the room with gentle steps and told her softly that justice moved slowly but never failed to arrive. He assured her she was no longer alone. He promised her that the truth would continue to surface. Lily nodded, feeling the weight in her chest lighten just a little. Across town, Victor received a notice from the Internal Revenue Service stating that several of his recent transactions were being reviewed. He stared at the letter with growing panic. His hands trembled as he read it again. The reality of a much larger threat began to settle in. His eyes darted across the room as if searching for someone to blame. Then, a terrifying realization hit him. Lily was no longer without support. Victor whispered the words as if in disbelief. He said, "This could not be happening." But it was. And it was only the beginning. Victor Hart appeared on morning television with the look of a grieving husband who wanted nothing more than peace. He sat beneath bright studio lights, wearing a neatly pressed suit, and he rubbed his eyes as if exhausted from endless worry. When the interviewer asked him about the incident with Lily, he shook his head slowly and let his voice tremble. He told the audience that he loved his wife deeply and that he only wished for a calm home where their child could grow in safety. He said the entire situation had grown out of a misunderstanding fueled by stress and fear. At one point, he placed his hand over his heart and whispered that he wanted his family to stay whole. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. The camera zoomed in, capturing the glisten perfectly. His performance was convincing. Viewers watching from their homes could feel his practiced vulnerability. Some even praised him online, calling him a devoted man facing emotional hardship. For a few hours, the tide of public sentiment shifted in his favor. People began repeating his version of events. They said Lily must have been overwhelmed by pregnancy hormones. They said Victor was trying his best. They said there had to be more to the story. Meanwhile, Lily sat on her hospital bed, holding her phone with trembling hands. She scrolled through comments written by strangers who believed Victor. Many were harsh. Some accused her of exaggerating. Others claimed she was unstable or seeking attention. The words pierced her like small blades. She felt her chest tighten and her breath grow shallow. The humiliation was overwhelming. She considered turning off the phone, but her eyes stayed fixed on the screen, as if she needed to feel every wound. She lowered the phone and pressed both palms against her face. The sense of isolation was suffocating. For a moment, she wished she could vanish from the world entirely. She wanted silence, for the voices to stop, for the doubt to disappear. Her shoulders shook as she tried to hold back sobs. The emotional weight made her feel as if she were sinking beneath a rising tide, with no strength to lift her head above the water. Then, a gentle knock touched the doorframe. Harold Bennett stepped inside. His presence brought a quiet steadiness to the room. He walked to her bedside and sat down without saying anything at first. His calm silence gave her space to breathe. After a moment, he told her in a soft voice that the truth had a way of shining through the darkest lies. He reminded her that she had survived something terrifying and that her courage mattered. His words did not erase her pain, but they planted a small anchor inside her heart. Later that afternoon, Sarah Coleman arrived, carrying a folder of papers. She greeted Lily warmly and sat beside her. She explained that the narrative Victor had created needed to be challenged. She said that silence would only strengthen him. She had written a short statement for Lily to read on camera. She assured her that the words were honest, clear, and respectful. Lily hesitated. The thought of speaking publicly frightened her. But Sarah's encouragement gave her a little strength. She agreed to try. They arranged a small press recording in a quiet corner of the hospital. A single camera was placed on a tripod. Lily sat in a chair with her hands resting on her lap. Her voice shook as she began reading the statement. She spoke about fear, truth, and the desire to protect her child. She said she never asked for attention. She only asked for safety. As she continued, her voice gained a fragile steadiness. She did not raise her tone. She did not accuse. She simply spoke from her heart. The video was posted online within minutes. Something unexpected happened. It spread rapidly. People could hear the authenticity in her voice. They could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Across the country, viewers paused to listen. Many women, especially older women who had lived through difficult marriages of their own, began sharing the video. They wrote messages of compassion and strength. They said they believed her. They said she deserved protection. They said no woman should feel alone in such a moment. Support groups began reposting the video. Domestic violence organizations issued statements calling for a deeper investigation. The tone of public conversation shifted again. Victor's performance on television now appeared calculated rather than sincere. Comment sections filled with questions about his credibility. Reporters began requesting interviews with experts on emotional manipulation. Slowly, the sympathy he had gathered earlier began slipping away. Meanwhile, Victor faced growing pressure from within his own company. Employees saw the public reaction and started voicing concern. Shareholders worried about the damage to the firm's reputation. The board called an emergency meeting. After reviewing the influx of complaints and the growing media scrutiny, they voted to suspend Victor from his executive position. The official announcement was released the same afternoon. Victor read it in disbelief. His face reddened with anger. He felt betrayed by the very people he believed owed him loyalty. His personal life was also unraveling. The woman he had been secretly involved with decided to distance herself. She called him briefly to say she could not risk being connected to a scandal. She ended the relationship abruptly. Victor reacted with fury, slamming his hand on the table and shouting that she lacked courage. She hung up before he could finish. The rejection stung him more deeply than he wanted to admit. In a surge of frustration, Victor called his attorney. He shouted into the phone, demanding to know why things were falling apart. He blamed the lawyer for failing to control the media. He accused him of incompetence. The lawyer remained calm, reminding him that lies were difficult to protect when evidence was mounting. Victor refused to listen. He paced the room angrily, gripping the phone until his knuckles turned white. When the call ended, he flung the device onto the desk. The noise echoed through the empty office. The sharp crack sounded like the beginning of something collapsing inside him. He marched across the room and slammed the door shut with all his strength. The heavy sound filled the hall. It was the sound of a man losing control, not only of the narrative, but of himself. The world outside continued to shift without him, and Lily, though still fragile, was no longer standing alone. The search warrant was executed early in the morning, before the sun had fully risen. Officers from the local police department approached Victor Hart's house with quiet determination. They knocked firmly, announced themselves, and entered once the door was opened. Victor stood inside, wearing yesterday's clothes and carrying an expression that hovered between disbelief and resentment. He tried to ask why the search was necessary, but the officers simply handed him the paperwork and began their work. They moved with methodical precision through the living room, office, and bedroom, opening drawers and examining files with gloved hands. It did not take long for them to discover what they were looking for. In Victor's home office, inside a locked cabinet, officers found several folders filled with questionable financial documents. Bank statements reflected transfers that made little sense. Receipts pointed toward hidden payments. One officer raised an eyebrow as he flipped through pages that showed large sums of money moving in ways that could not be easily explained. The files were carefully collected, documented, and placed into evidence bags. In another drawer, the officers made a more chilling discovery. They found a stack of handwritten notes addressed to Lily. Some contained harsh language, others carried clear threats. One note warned her to stay quiet if she knew what was good for her. Another accused her of ruining his life and said she would pay for it. These letters were photographed and sealed. When Victor saw the officers holding them, he tried to dismiss them as private arguments taken out of context. The officers remained unmoved. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Sarah Coleman sat at a small table with papers spread neatly in front of her. She had begun organizing every piece of evidence they had so far. She typed summaries, she attached dates, she highlighted connections that strengthened the case. Her goal was to turn the scattered pieces into a coherent legal structure. The more she worked, the more the picture became clear. Victor not only harmed Lily, but he had also built a long pattern of intimidation and deceit. Sarah felt a quiet fire inside her as she continued assembling the documents. At the same time, Harold Bennett sat in his living room with headphones resting around his neck. He opened the original video he had recorded on the day of the attack. The clip already showed the violence plainly, but he wanted the clearest possible version for investigators. He adjusted color levels, reduced background noise, and sharpened the frames so that every movement was visible. The sound of the chair hitting the window became crisp. Lily's cry became more distinct. Harold saved the enhanced file and nodded with satisfaction. Back at Victor's house, officers collected several pieces of physical evidence from the living room. They gathered fragments of broken glass from the shattered window. They inspected the heavy wooden chair that Victor had thrown. They lifted it carefully to examine its dents and edges. Everything was catalogued and placed into sealed bags. Later, an analyst reviewed the items and concluded that the force used to throw the chair had been extremely strong. It supported Lily's account that the incident had been violent rather than accidental. As word of the investigation spread, other neighbors stepped forward. One neighbor provided an audio recording taken accidentally on a home security camera. It captured raised voices and loud noises coming from Victor's house several nights earlier. Although the recording was muffled, it added another layer of context. Community members began to speak more openly. People who once hesitated to get involved now offered statements supporting Lily. The shift in public sentiment grew stronger each day. Victor's professional life deteriorated rapidly. The company's board reviewed the situation and restricted his access to internal networks. His login credentials were disabled. His company emails were suspended. Several accounts tied to his business activities became inaccessible. He called the office demanding explanations, but they gave him none. The walls around his career were closing in, and he could feel the tightening pressure. Financial consequences escalated as well. The Internal Revenue Service sent him a formal notice requesting clarification on recent financial activity. The envelope sat on his desk like a threat he could not ignore. He picked it up, dropped it, and picked it up again. His hands shook as he read it. The wording was direct. He needed to provide documentation. He needed to explain discrepancies. He needed to respond immediately. His pulse quickened as he realized that every mistake he had made was catching up with him. While Victor spiraled, Lily faced new responsibilities of her own. Sarah informed her that she would need to testify in court. Lily listened quietly, her eyes widening slightly, but she did not shrink back. Sarah explained the process patiently and assured her she would not face it alone. They scheduled practice sessions. Sarah asked her questions that mirrored what she would hear from attorneys. She guided her on how to stay calm, how to breathe, and how to answer clearly without letting emotions overwhelm her. Lily stumbled at first, but she gradually improved. Each session built her confidence a little more. The stress of preparation weighed heavily on Lily, but it also brought strength. She was no longer the woman who felt powerless in a silent room. She was learning to stand firmly. She began believing that her voice mattered. She touched her belly often, reminding herself that she was fighting not only for herself, but for her unborn child. Her courage deepened with each passing day. Her doctor checked on her regularly. After a thorough examination, he informed her that the baby remained healthy and strong. Relief washed over her like warm light. Knowing her child was safe gave her renewed determination. It was one more reason to keep going, to stay steady, to claim her truth. Victor tried calling Lily several times, but she refused to answer. She blocked his number. The silence enraged him, yet he also feared it. Without the ability to manipulate her with words, he felt increasingly powerless. He walked around his house in a haze of frustration, watching everything crumble. At last, all the evidence gathered by police, Sarah, Harold, and community members was compiled into a single complete file. When the final document was finished, Sarah delivered it to the prosecutor. The prosecutor reviewed the case thoroughly. After several hours, he closed the folder and spoke with firm resolve. He said it was time to bring justice forward. Victor Hart awoke before dawn with a pounding heart and a mind filled with panic. He knew the investigation against him was growing stronger by the day. He felt the grip of law enforcement tightening around him. He believed that if he stayed in Colorado any longer, he would be arrested. In a frantic rush, he grabbed a duffel bag from his closet and began stuffing it with stacks of cash he had hidden for emergencies. His movements were clumsy and rushed. He did not care about clothes or keepsakes. He only cared about escape. He zipped the bag, slung it over his shoulder, and hurried toward the garage. The sky was still dark as he started the engine of his car. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. He backed out of the driveway with a jolt and sped down the street. His plan was simple. If he could reach the Utah border, he believed he could disappear for long enough to find a new strategy. He pressed harder on the gas pedal as the miles passed. The rising sun cast a faint orange glow across the highway, but Victor barely noticed it. His thoughts were tangled with fear and desperation. He checked his rearview mirror repeatedly. Every pair of headlights triggered a spike of anxiety. His breathing grew shallow as he drove farther west. He imagined officers closing in behind him. He imagined handcuffs. He imagined a courtroom filled with people who wanted him punished. His fear only pushed him to drive faster. The car roared across the open road, and the landscape blurred past him. Several hours into the drive, a patrol officer along the highway noticed the license plate number that had been flagged in a statewide alert. The officer glanced at his screen, confirmed the match, and radioed the nearest units. More patrol cars began positioning themselves along the route Victor was taking. Officers laid down a spike strip across a section of the road ahead. They worked quickly, knowing that the chance to stop him might be brief. Victor saw nothing unusual at first. The road curved gently, bending around a small hill. When he rounded the corner, it was too late. Bright lights flashed. A patrol car angled across the shoulder. He slammed on the brakes, but the spike strip caught his tires instantly. A loud ripping sound filled the air as the car jerked and swerved uncontrollably. He lost traction, and the vehicle slid sideways into the gravel on the side of the road. The duffel bag in the back seat tumbled forward, spilling cash across the floor. When the car finally stopped, Victor's chest heaved. His ears rang. Before he could gather himself, he saw officers surrounding the vehicle with their weapons lowered but ready. Their voices boomed through megaphones, instructing him to exit with his hands visible. Victor gripped the steering wheel tightly. He refused to move. He shouted that he was innocent. He shouted that he had done nothing wrong. His voice cracked with fear. The officers repeated the command. Still, Victor stayed inside, shaking his head wildly. The seconds dragged out, each one heavy with tension. Finally, the officers approached the vehicle and struck the passenger window with a specialized tool. The glass shattered. Victor screamed and covered his face. They unlocked the door, pulled him out, and forced him to the ground. His knees hit the gravel as he cried out. He tried to pull away, but the officers held him firmly. His shouts grew frantic. He called Lily's name over and over, as if she were the only person who could save him. High above, a news helicopter hovered in the sky. Its camera zoomed in on the dramatic scene unfolding below. The arrest was broadcast live on several local stations. Viewers watched as Victor flailed on the ground, while officers secured his wrists with handcuffs. Commentators explained that he had been wanted for questioning in connection with multiple charges. The footage spread quickly across social platforms as people reacted in shock, curiosity, or grim satisfaction. At St. Mary's Hospital, Lily sat in her room with the television on mute. She watched the chaotic images with an unreadable expression. Her hands rested on her belly. She did not cry, nor did she smile. She simply stared, as if processing the realization that the man who once controlled her life had collapsed completely under the weight of his own actions. For the first time, she felt a strange calm settle inside her. Harold Bennett sat beside her in a quiet chair. When he noticed her breathing slow, he reached out and gently held her hand. She did not look at him, but she held his hand back. Victor was pulled to his feet by the officers. His hair was messy, and his face was streaked with dust and sweat. As he was escorted to a patrol car, news microphones recorded his final attempts to protest. He shouted that this was all a mistake. He accused the world of turning against him. His words grew desperate until the car door shut, cutting off the sound. Once inside the county jail, Victor was informed of the additional charges he now faced. Attempting to flee the state and refusing to comply with officers had added several new counts to his case. He sat on a bench in the holding area, staring at the floor. His mind raced in circles. The walls felt closer each minute. The reality of confinement pressed against him with suffocating force. No one came to support him. No one called. No one listened to his claims of innocence. Outside the jail, the community reacted with relief. People who had followed the story felt that justice was beginning to take shape. Supporters of Lily sent messages to her hospital room. Some brought flowers. Others wrote cards filled with encouragement. The sense of collective relief grew as more people learned that Victor was finally in custody. Lily felt a heaviness lift from her chest. She had spent years carrying fear. Now, even though grief and exhaustion remained, she felt the first true breath of safety. She whispered to her unborn child that they would be all right. She told herself that the worst part was finally ending. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from sadness, but from release. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office reviewed the final details of the evidence. The thorough work by Sarah, Harold, and the investigative teams had produced a complete and powerful case. When the prosecutor closed the final folder, he prepared the documentation for court. As the day closed, the doors of the courthouse swung open for the next stage. The path toward judgment waited ahead. The courthouse was filled long before the session began. People crowded into every bench, leaning forward as if the air itself carried tension. The atmosphere in the room felt stretched thin, as if a single sound could make it snap. Reporters whispered to one another while adjusting their equipment. Camera shutters clicked softly. Family members, community leaders, and curious onlookers gathered with silent anticipation. The weight of judgment hung over the room like a heavy curtain. When the doors at the side of the courtroom opened, Lily Hart stepped inside. Her pregnancy was now unmistakably visible, her belly gently lifting the fabric of her dress. Her face looked pale but composed. Each step she took was slow and steady. She walked with the quiet dignity of someone who had endured fear and humiliation but still chose to stand firm. Several people rose instinctively as she passed, moved by the strength she showed simply by entering the room. She lowered herself onto the witness bench beside her attorney, Sarah Coleman, who gave her a reassuring nod. Across the courtroom, a second door opened. Victor Hart was led inside by two officers. The change in him shocked many who had followed the case. His cheeks were hollow, his shoulders hunched forward. His once confident stride had become a tired shuffle. He took his seat with eyes that darted uneasily around the room, searching for sympathy and finding none. In that moment, the courtroom felt colder. When the trial officially began, Sarah rose from her seat and walked toward the center of the room. Her expression was calm but firm. She began by presenting the core of the case against Victor. Her voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom. She described the events inside the Hart home, the history of threats, the financial misconduct, and the pattern of intimidation. She spoke without rushing, allowing each detail to sink into the minds of the jurors. Then she asked the judge to allow the presentation of the primary visual evidence. The lights dimmed slightly as a screen lowered behind the witness stand. The video recorded by Harold Bennett appeared. Victor's voice filled the room first, raised with anger. Then the violent moment played out in full view. The sound of the heavy wooden chair crashing into the window rang sharply across the silent courtroom. Several jurors flinched. A few spectators covered their mouths. The demonstration was undeniable. After the video ended, Lily slowly stood. All eyes shifted to her. The judge reminded her to speak only when ready. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed it on the railing of the witness stand. She told the court how she had felt in that moment, believing she might lose her child. Her voice tightened as she remembered the sound of the window shattering and the fear that surged through her body. She described the pain, the shock, and the terror that followed. The room listened without interruption. Even the reporters hesitated to write, worried that their pens might disturb the fragile atmosphere. Victor attempted to interrupt her testimony with a loud objection. He claimed she was exaggerating. The judge immediately ordered him to stop speaking. His voice broke into silence under the stern command. The jurors exchanged glances, some shaking their heads at the inappropriate outburst. The prosecutor then stepped forward with a series of documents that exposed Victor's illegal financial activities. He presented records of concealed debts, falsified transfers, and suspicious withdrawals. Each sheet of paper added weight to the growing case against him. The room absorbed the evidence with widening eyes. It was no longer only about violence. It had become a portrait of a man capable of deceit on multiple levels. Next came the witnesses. Lily's doctor explained her medical condition on the day of the incident and described the risks she and her baby faced. Harold Bennett recounted what he saw and why he recorded the video. The police officers explained the evidence collected during the search of the Hart house. Each testimony chipped away at Victor's credibility. Each witness painted a clearer picture of the truth. Lies had no room left to hide. By the time the closing statements ended, the jurors needed little time to deliberate. When they returned, the courtroom stood still. The foreman rose. His voice was calm but resolute. He declared Victor Hart guilty on all major charges. A ripple of emotion moved through the room. Gasps were heard from a few spectators. Others nodded in agreement, their faces solemn. Victor collapsed into his chair with a look of disbelief. His skin turned pale, almost gray. His hands shook uncontrollably. For the first time, he seemed to fully grasp the consequences of his actions. Gone was the arrogance he once wore like armor. In its place was fear and collapse. Lily closed her eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not from pain but from relief. She placed her hand on her belly and breathed deeply. The sound of the verdict felt like a long-awaited release. A soft cry escaped her lips, but it was a cry of peace. Harold, sitting beside her, reached over and gently held her hand. His eyes carried pride, empathy, and the quiet strength of someone who had fought a personal battle through her. The judge then turned to Victor. The courtroom remained silent as the judge spoke. He reviewed the charges, the evidence, and the emotional impact of Victor's actions. When he reached the sentencing, he met Victor's desperate eyes with unwavering firmness. He announced that Victor Hart was to serve 25 years in prison. The words echoed through the room like a final bell of justice. Victor's knees buckled as officers lifted him from his seat. He was escorted out of the courtroom with his head lowered and his wrists bound. He did not speak. He did not struggle. The silence that followed him out the door was a stark contrast to the chaos he once brought into Lily's life. Back at the witness stand, Lily exhaled a long, trembling breath. She whispered softly that her child was finally safe. As she leaned gently against Harold's shoulder, the courtroom slowly emptied, leaving behind the unshakable truth that justice had prevailed. The small house Lily Hart moved into sat on a quiet street at the edge of a suburban neighborhood. The roof was low and welcoming. The front porch was framed by 2 white columns and a railing that looked newly painted. When she stood in the living room for the first time, the stillness felt almost unreal. There were no raised voices, no slamming doors, no fear hiding in the corners. It felt like a place that belonged to someone who wanted her life to begin again. Lily placed her hand on her belly and allowed the silence to wrap around her like a warm blanket. Outside the large front window, leaves drifted gently from the tall maple tree in the yard. The air had begun to cool, bringing with it the golden tones of early autumn. Some leaves brushed against the glass as they fell, creating soft, rustling patterns. Lily watched them for a moment, breathing slowly. The calmness of the scene made her eyes sting. She had not felt this kind of peace in a long time. The world outside seemed to whisper that it was time for something new. Her first project in the new home was preparing the nursery. She opened boxes filled with baby blankets, toys, and pastel decorations. She placed a small lamp on the dresser and tested its warm yellow light. She arranged stuffed animals in a neat row along the crib's edge. With each item she placed, she felt herself letting go of another piece of the pain she had carried. The room slowly transformed into a place of hope. She ran her fingers along the soft fabric of the crib sheets and smiled. It felt like stitching her heart back together. Harold Bennett came by often to help with repairs. He fixed a loose cabinet door in the kitchen. He replaced a flickering porch light. He oiled the hinges of the nursery closet so they would not squeak. Each visit brought a sense of reassurance. His quiet presence made Lily feel supported without pressure or judgment. He never asked too many questions. He understood what it meant to rebuild oneself slowly. They shared many afternoons in comfortable silence while he worked and she organized the house. The community also reached out. People she did not know left small boxes on her doorstep filled with diapers, wipes, and baby clothes. One woman embroidered a quilt with soft blue and cream squares. Another dropped off 2 cans of formula and a handwritten note wishing Lily strength. Lily cried when she read the message. These were gestures from strangers, yet they felt like the hands of a village holding her upright. Women from the local church gathered during one weekend and delivered several handmade blankets. They told her they had been praying for her. Their voices were gentle and sincere. Lily held each blanket with trembling hands and thanked them as best as she could. Their kindness reminded her that some hearts in the world still gave without expecting anything in return. As the weeks passed, Lily joined a support group for women recovering from trauma. The first meeting terrified her. She sat in a chair at the edge of the circle, unsure if she could speak. But when she heard others share their stories, she felt her own barriers begin to loosen. She found comfort in the shared experience of women who understood fear, betrayal, and survival. Slowly, she learned how to breathe through the heavier moments. She learned that she was not alone. She learned that healing was not a straight path, but a journey that required patience. Lily also began keeping a journal by her bed. She wrote every night before sleep. Some entries were long, some were only a sentence. She wrote whatever came to her mind. She wrote about her fears. She wrote about her baby. She wrote about the strange feeling of learning to trust herself again. Putting her thoughts on paper gave her a sense of release. It was a quiet space, just for her, an anchor when emotions ran high. She made it a habit to walk around the neighborhood each morning. The air was cool and refreshing. She liked the way the sunlight fell across the sidewalks and how the breeze gently lifted her hair. She greeted neighbors who waved. The steady movement of her steps soothed her. She could feel her body becoming stronger again. With each walk, she reminded herself that forward motion was enough. It did not matter how fast she went. It mattered that she kept moving. At her next medical appointment, the doctor performed a detailed ultrasound. The rhythmic sound of her baby's heartbeat filled the room. The doctor smiled and told her the baby was healthy, strong, and growing exactly as expected. Relief flooded through Lily's chest. She let out a soft laugh. It felt like the weight of months lifting all at once. She thanked the doctor repeatedly. She pressed the ultrasound picture against her chest as she left the room. Meanwhile, far from Lily's peaceful days, Victor Hart sat behind the walls of the state prison where he had been sent after his conviction. He submitted an appeal, hoping that some technicality would grant him relief. The court reviewed his request carefully. When the decision came back, it was firm. The appeal was denied. Victor was left to face the consequences of his actions. His bitterness grew inside the quiet cell. He blamed everyone but himself. He spent long hours alone, pacing the concrete floor and muttering at shadows. Lily no longer thought about him. His existence had become irrelevant to the life she was building. When his name appeared on the news one afternoon in a brief legal update, she simply changed the channel. She felt no anger, only distance. It was as if he belonged to a past life that had dissolved. With each passing day, she felt her smile returning more easily. Some mornings, she found herself humming softly while preparing breakfast. Other mornings, she paused by the nursery doorway and felt pure gratitude for the peaceful space. Sarah visited her occasionally to close out the final steps of the legal process. They sat together with tea and reviewed documents. At the end of their last meeting, Sarah placed the completed case file into her briefcase and told Lily that the chapter was officially closed. Harold continued to bring warm soup every week. They ate at the small kitchen table. Sometimes they talked about his late wife. Sometimes they talked about Lily's hopes for the future. One afternoon, he looked at her with gentle pride and told her that she had the same quiet strength his wife once had. The comment moved Lily deeply. She reached across the table and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it conveyed gratitude, trust, and connection. As the season continued its slow shift, Lily felt something awaken inside her. It was the unmistakable sense that a new chapter was beginning. She stood near the window one evening and watched the soft glow of the sunset fill the room. The baby stirred in her belly. A small kick pressed gently against her hand. She smiled. It was a reminder that life was moving forward. It was a promise of tomorrow. And in that quiet moment, peace finally felt real. The winter morning arrived quietly, bringing with it a soft glow that drifted through the curtains of Lily Hart's bedroom. The light was pale and gentle, almost like snowfall captured in the air. It poured across the wooden floor and wrapped the room in a peaceful brightness. Lily opened her eyes slowly. She felt a stillness inside her, a moment of calm before the world shifted again. As she pushed herself upright, a sharp wave rolled across her abdomen. She inhaled sharply. She knew this feeling. The time had come. She whispered a steady breath and placed a hand on her belly. Her daughter was ready to meet the world. Another contraction built with growing intensity. Lily picked up her phone and called Harold Bennett. She spoke between breaths and told him it had begun. Harold did not hesitate. He grabbed his coat, his keys, and hurried out the door. By the time he reached Lily's driveway, she was standing at the front step with her hospital bag in her hand. Her face was tight with pain, but her eyes were steady. Harold supported her gently and helped her into the passenger seat. He buckled her seatbelt with the tender care of someone who cherished her well-being. Then he started the car and drove toward Street Mary's Hospital as snowflakes drifted from the sky. The hospital staff recognized Lily immediately when she arrived. Nurses guided her into a wheelchair and took her to the maternity ward. Harold stayed beside her until the medical team asked him to wait in the hall. Before he stepped back, he touched her shoulder and told her she was strong enough to face anything. Lily nodded weakly and squeezed his hand. She felt a strange combination of fear and anticipation. The contractions came faster. The world around her blurred into movement, voices, and light. Moments later, Sarah Coleman arrived at the hospital. She had rushed from her office when Harold called. She entered the maternity wing with purposeful steps and found Lily in a delivery room preparing for labor. She approached her with a warm smile and placed her hand on Lily's arm. She told her she was not alone and would not be alone at any point in the process. Lily exhaled with relief. Sarah stood by her bedside, offering words of encouragement and calm reminders to breathe. The room felt safer with her presence. Hours passed. The pain rose and fell like waves crashing against a shoreline. Lily gripped the rails of the bed and pushed through each contraction. Sweat formed along her hairline. The doctor monitored her progress carefully and offered steady reassurance. Nurses adjusted pillows, checked monitors, and kept the room moving with a sense of practiced grace. Lily closed her eyes often, whispering soft promises to her unborn daughter. She told her she was strong. She told her they would meet soon. At last, after one final push that seemed to gather every ounce of strength within her, the room filled with the sound of a newborn cry. The noise was small, sharp, and beautiful. Lily's breath broke into a trembling sob of relief. The doctor lifted the baby gently and placed her into Lily's arms. Warmth surged through her. The tiny girl lay against her chest, breathing softly, wrapped in a soft white blanket. Lily touched her cheek with shaking fingers. She whispered, "Hello." She felt a profound sense of peace as her daughter settled against her heartbeat. The nurses cleaned the baby and confirmed she was healthy. They congratulated Lily and praised her courage. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. Harold, who had been waiting anxiously outside, was invited into the room. When he stepped inside and saw the newborn cradled in Lily's arms, He froze, his face softened and filled with emotion. He approached slowly, as if afraid to disturb the moment. When Lily looked up at him, she smiled and told him her daughter's name. She said the baby would be called Hope Bennett Hart. The middle name was chosen to honor Harold for his protection, his kindness, and the strength he shared when she needed it most. Harold covered his mouth with his hand as tears filled his eyes. He whispered that he was deeply honored. He leaned closer and looked at the small child who represented a new beginning. Hope let out a tiny sound, and Harold chuckled softly through his tears. The hospital room soon filled with flowers delivered by friends, neighbors, and strangers who had followed Lily's journey. Cards lined the window ledge. Some carried simple messages of congratulations. Others expressed admiration for her bravery. The nurses taped drawings from neighborhood children to the walls. Each gift added warmth to the room. Lily felt a deep gratitude settle in her chest. She had not expected this outpouring of love. As the hours passed, the exhaustion faded into serenity. Lily lay back against her pillows and held Hope close. The soft sound of the baby's breathing lulled her into a restful calm. She felt her body relax for the first time in months. She whispered to Hope that their lives were beginning again, free from the shadows that had once followed them. When she returned home a few days later, the small house felt transformed. The morning sunlight spilled across the nursery, where pastel colors brightened every corner. Lily carried Hope inside and paused to absorb the moment. She sat by the window in a rocking chair, cradling her daughter and watching snow drift gently outside. The rhythm of the chair and the warmth of Hope in her arms created a sense of perfect stillness. It felt like the entire world had slowed to honor their peace. Harold visited that afternoon. He sat beside Lily and watched Hope sleep. His eyes glowed with pride. The quiet companionship between them felt natural. No words were needed. They simply sat together, united by the long journey they had survived. Lily looked at him and whispered that they had made it through everything. Harold nodded slowly. His smile was soft and full of meaning. Hope shifted slightly in Lily's arms, reacting to the sound of their voices. Lily touched her cheek gently. The baby relaxed again. The room held nothing but safety, warmth, and new beginnings. Lily felt her heart settle peacefully. The world outside continued its gentle snowfall. Inside the small house, mother and child rested in quiet harmony. No fear lingered in the corners. No shadow approached the door. Only love filled the space. And the story closed with a simple truth. After everything they endured, real happiness was found in safety, in healing, and in the embrace of love.